Good morning. It is 11:52 a.m. on Sunday, December 29th, 2019. I'm Christiana Ellis, and yes, I just got up. This is 5 more minutes. Whew, boy, this cold is just kicking my butt. I'm better than yesterday, I think. The symptoms continue to evolve anyway. Boy, yeah. I am today still planning to talk about session 13 of Cowboy Bebop, Jupiter Jazz, Part 2. Now, we talked last week about how this two-parter has some stuff that, I don't want to even say charitably didn't age well. I think, yeah, so some of the stuff in the first part doesn't age well. And then even in this second part, some of the stuff about Gren and what happened with Gren's hormones and all of that, leading to them being, sort of androgynous, suggests that it's a little bit like exploitative. It's not obvious why that's in the story. Like, what is the point other than to sort of just shock and titillate exactly? Except that then that's not really what the story is about. It's a little bit of a weird choice. Other than to just surprise us with, ooh, blah. So, I don't know. It's generally a pretty sympathetic story towards Gren, ultimately. It's just, it's a strange detail that when placed alongside the cliche and unflattering presentation of the prostitutes in the previous episode, it's just not great. But with that said, let's continue to talk about this episode, because this has actually got some really interesting stuff in it. I think that, let's just talk through it. So we begin with Gren telling Faye his story. I'll go ahead and say his, since despite the presentation, he does seem to still identify as a man, despite being physically bodied in an ambiguous way, which again, doesn't really matter into the story except for being functioning as a minor part of his plot later. But okay, anyway, apparently he fought in a war on Titan, and Vicious was one of the other soldiers in his unit, a comrade. And Gren actually takes a moment to sort of focus on that word, comrade, like it's an especially meaningful word for them. And we know that the idea of a soldier's connection to other members of their unit can be a very close one. And in this case, though, Gren seems to have kind of a particular, not even obsession, but affection for Vicious. Vicious kind of scared them, fascinated them a little bit. There's the whole bit with having the little music box, which plays the music that we have, heard playing on the saxophone before. Listening to it, Gren asks, hey, can I play that melody on my sax later? And then Vicious just gives him the music box, and then does the whole thing where, scares him, makes it look like it's about to stab him in the face, but it's actually just killing a scorpion, and then he just leaves. And we can kind of get why there would be a little bit of a weird fascination going on there. And, but then, returning from the war, apparently Gren gets accused of espionage and is told that Vicious testified against them. On top of that, this reveal happens later in the episode, but there was also a solar transmitter in the music box. What does that actually mean? That feels like there's something that like is not fully explained, but it sounds like it was maybe Vicious who was the spy, and therefore maybe giving the music box to Gren was part of that whole thing. And so that's a weird, basically Gren is now obsessed with, I have to see Vicious again to, I guess, find out if he really did it. But once the confrontation actually happens, it seems clear that Gren knows that Vicious did it. And it's more a matter of just wanting to confront him about it. Just like, how could you? Why did you? But yeah, so but in the meantime, though, we have Faye sitting there listening to this just saying, he's just going to kill you. There's no point. Like, why did you even bring me here? He says he doesn't care if, Vicious kills him or not. And then it's like, Faye says, why did you bring me here if you're just gonna, if that's what you're doing? Gren says, maybe I just wanted to be with someone before the end. And Faye basically says, that's messed up because it's fundamentally a selfish thing. You have, Faye doesn't say all this, but what we can kind of intuit is that he's set himself up with a martyr complex where somehow going on a suicide mission to kill Vicious, confront and kill, knowing that he will probably be unsuccessful and die in the attempt. He has built that up in his head as a noble thing, and that he sort of wanted to tell the story to someone first. And Faye calls him out on how that's really, you're building all that up in your head. It's stupid. You're just wasting your life when you could do something more interesting or useful with it. Although, why she then chooses to open fire on Gren, trying to kill him at that point, I don't know. I suppose at that point, Faye is sort of slightly more like his prisoner. And so maybe that's, she's trying to say, you're a crazy person, I need to get away. It's a little bit unclear in the episode, honestly. But he dodges her fire and manages to subdue her. And in the meantime, we follow Jet, who's still trying to track down Faye, and discovers at that same bar, it's like, okay, well, yeah, so Faye was definitely here. I remember for sure because it's been 2 years since we had the last beautiful woman here, and she sat in that same stool, and her name was Julia, and so Jet is learning all of that. In the meantime, we last left Spike, apparently shot, lying unconscious. Turns out it was a tranquilizer gun. When Spike wakes up, he intuits that they were mocking him. I wonder about that, though. I suspect, even though they never confirm this, that the whole feeling from Spike about Lynn and Lynn's betrayal, like his willingness to choose sides, I think some of why Lynn would have jumped in the way to fire and use a tranquilizer gun might have been take Spike out of the fight non-lethally so that Spike and Vicious don't kill each other. And that, trying essentially to forestall that duel to the death type of thing, which could be potentially a lingering bit of affection for Spike. It's not clear, though. They don't really ever define it. Honestly, the stuff with Lynn kind of doesn't make a lot of sense, really, because it comes up again later, but we'll talk more about that. In the meantime, though, we have Spike kind of flashing back some of the same little shots he's seen before, like after his last fight with Vicious. And then now including some of the times, where, Faye was attending to him after that fight. And then a conversation with Julia where, he explains his eyes are different colors because, well, his left eye sees into the past, which, presumably, that's his, he has the one, artificial eye that we've seen that we don't know very much about really, but, it's all just very loaded imagery. But he wakes up, realizes he's tranquilized, and tries to get back to his ship, and find where Vicious went. He's frustrated because it's like all in code. Meanwhile, we have Jet still trying to track down Gren and Faye. It's kind of funny that the guy he asks for directions to the building is the same guy that has subsequently gotten fought by Spike and Faye and Gren, who this time says he doesn't want anything to do with foreigners. But he gets to the apartment, finds Faye handcuffed and groggy. And meanwhile, we have Gren. His plan with Vicious is to get close by pretending, using his body, to pretending to be a woman, as just a carrier, and that hoping that will let him get close enough to see Vicious face to face. And then at this point we have, there's a lot of cross-cutting in this episode, so it's a lot of little bits here and there, but here's where we have a really important conversation with Jet and Faye. Jet is, Faye is kind of woken up a little bit, but she's still kind of groggy. She's, being brought back to the Bebop, and she's just like, why did you bring me back? He says, well, I want my money back. And he observes, too, that it's like, you sabotaged the Bebop, but not the Swordfish and the Hammerhead, which are, the, Spike and Jet's, smaller ships. And that suggests that she wanted them to find her. And she just, kind of demurs there, but points out there's only 20,000 Wulongs in the safe anyway. And the point, and what's really kind of lovely but unspoken among all of them is, like, she does not confirm, yes, I wanted you to come find me. But we can certainly note, she certainly, it was like we said last time, leaving the note on top of stealing the stuff in the antifreeze, it does feel like, that's not what you do if you're really just trying to get away clean, like that's twisting the knife in a way that makes it sound like you want them to chase you. And it's all for a stupid small amount of money that she doesn't have anymore. But he brings her back anyway, because of course he does, because it's Jet, and it's because she does want to go back. She doesn't protest. It's like, it's our little Bebop family, as dysfunctional as they are. And likewise, in kind of the same little, a little bit before that, Jet had told Spike, well, if you bring in Gren, you can come back. Which, right, we'll see. We do have few little bits with Ed and Ein in this episode where they don't really function in the story at all. It's mostly just like little brief scenes to make it clear that it's like, we didn't forget about them. They're just not really part of this story. And they're just being silly. But so in the meantime, Gren up in making the deal, reveals that first of all, the briefcase that Vicious tried to give as the Titan Opal reward, the payment for the drugs, Gren kicks it back over and shoots at it, revealing that it was a bomb, revealing that he knew all along Vicious was going to betray him and backstab him, and that it wasn't a legit deal. And at that point, it's a fight, but at this point, we have the explosion draws Spike in his ship, but at this point, Gren makes his confrontation. Is like, Julia, when I met Julia and she heard that the little music box was a present from you, she was the one that knew that there would be a solar transmitter in it. And you're trying to kill me again. We fought in the war together. How could you? I looked up to you. And at this point, Vicious simultaneously reveals that Faye was right and just makes it clear what a contemptible person he is by just kind of saying, that was just you being stupid to expect any different, to believe in anything. You shouldn't believe in anything. There's nothing to believe in this universe. And I don't know, this is where I'll say again, I don't think Vicious is a very interesting character, honestly. He's just empty inside. He's a box that does mean things. But that's okay, because this is Gren's story, and for Gren to feel that, and to have, and when I say Vicious reveals Faye was right, is basically by saying, you're not going to get anything out of confronting him because he's just an empty box. And to think that you're going to be able to say the words to his face and somehow he'll realize how bad it was to do what he did. It's like, he's not, because he doesn't care. You were wrong to have ever attributed any feeling to him at all, because there's nothing there. There's no there for Vicious. Which is interesting in the effect it has on other characters, but does not make Vicious in and of himself interesting. But in any event, Gren starts trying to shoot at him, and this is where Lynn jumps and catches the bullet and dies. And this is again where, like, Spike is mad at Vicious for getting Lynn killed now, and Lynn says, he didn't die for me, he died for the Order. And I guess, like, the gangs, but, like, this is where the stuff with all the different gangs really just doesn't land, really. It's like, why? We don't really get enough to know why Spike cares about Lynn exactly, why Lynn would think it's so important to defend Vicious. It's like, I feel like a lot of that stuff is more nebulous than it ought to be, really. But, this is where we get the whole big dogfight, and where it's looking really bad, but it's revealed at the last minute that just like Vicious tried to hide a bomb in the payment for the deal, Gren had also rigged the little music box into a bomb and had put it in the Red Eye, which disables Vicious's ship, and he's able to get away but has to leave the fight without, finishing Gren and Spike off. But Gren had already sustained damage and crashed, being significantly injured, and Spike goes down to try to help, and we get the really touching moment of, Gren asks Spike, can you help me get on my way back to Titan? I'd like to see it one more time before I go. He's clearly dying, and is like, even if I die on the way, which Spike says is almost certain to happen, at least I'll be on the way. And it is really kind of touching, and ultimately as we have Spike willing to do that, to carry out this last request from Gren, who he doesn't know. Gren points out, it's like, you must be Spike. Julia told me all about you. And so this makes it extra meaningful for Spike too, because, this Julia that is, everything to him. And at this point we get a repeat of the scene with the laughing bull, and the kid observing a shooting star. But it's not an ordinary star, but the tear of a warrior who has finished his battle, but could not find his way to the holy realm where the Great Spirit awaits everyone. And it's very sad. So this, and then of course, Spike comes back to the Bebop without Gren, and is welcomed back inside anyway. And so this two-parter has some stuff in it that really just doesn't work. Like, all of the stuff with Lynn just feels like it doesn't land. There's stuff that just doesn't make sense. There's the things in the first two-parter that are kind of gross. But then a lot of it hinges again on who Vicious is, which I don't think is very interesting. But with those caveats aside, Gren's story, even though the whole hormone stuff is a little bit, feels like maybe exploitative, other than that, it's a really touching story about this person who is just really unable to let go of the past to their own demise. And but just, it's a really touching story, and I honestly really feel for Gren in all of that. And especially how that resonates with Spike, who talks about One Eye sees into the past, his whole obsession, how he almost blows up his whole relationship with Jet because he has to go to seek out, just because he heard Julia's name mentioned, codename Julia, because he cannot let go of the past either. It makes us wonder, Gren's sad fate, is that Spike's sad fate too? Maybe. And, and then that plus all of the stuff with Faye, where she has to reject everybody else before they can reject her, and runs away and sabotages, but then still tries to make them come after her. And then they're all welcomed back together, even though they didn't really ever, they set conditions for how they would need to come back, but then they didn't need them after all. And so there's a lot of really lovely stuff in this two-parter also. And so, mixed feelings, right? I think overall I'm left with the positive ones, but yeah, there's some good stuff in there. But in the meantime, next week, we're going to be talking about Session 14, Bohemian Rhapsody. So with that, I'll leave it for now and talk to you tomorrow for 5 more minutes.